Welcome to the Eclectic Gamers Podcast. Today is Sunday, June 9th, episode 221. My name is Tony.
I am Dennis. Tony, we got stuff to get through. We're excited. We're always excited to be here. We've never been tired. We've always been, and we remain excited. Unfortunately, we can't really be too excited about pinball because, well, we'll get to that when we're in the pinball section.
Right.
What
First, we need to get to the fencing and the home section.
That's in the pinball section as well.
Section,
All that is in the... All right. So I'll give you my quick update. I'm still playing Gungrave Gore. So that's my gaming update. And I still haven't played John Wick. That's my pinball update. And I don't have the quote yet for fence repairs. I got 2 sets of quotes in for the tree trimming. The giant tree in the back is a cottonwood, so I now know what that is. And so I went with the lower of the 2 quotes, which there was a $400 spread. And I guess it'll be weeks that I'll hear back. And
Probably.
I'll be ready to do it. But yeah, so we're looking at, well, not we, me is looking, because you don't have to help pay, about $1,600 to get all that cleaned out.
That's not bad.
No. And the higher quote was $2,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not terrible, in all honesty.
There you go. There's my plant update.
I've been playing Ultimate Admiral's Dreadnoughts.
Yes, that's your sequel to Rule the Waves.
Yes, it's what it's like a fancier, prettier UI version of Rule the Waves. Though there's a lot of things Rule the Waves does better, and like Ultimate Admiral's Dreadnoughts doesn't have airplanes at all. Where with Rule the Waves you have carriers and stuff. But the overall large thing is pretty similar. I've been having a fairly decent amount of fun with it. I would like the war to be over. I've been at war with England for 14 years now in game, and I'm tired of winning, Dennis. I mean, well, I am Italy. It started out in the first 3 years. I lost half my fleet, but I successfully captured Cyprus, Malta, and Gibraltar. So I completely kicked the British out of the Med.
Wow.
And I rebuilt my fleet, and everything was beautiful. But every time I asked for peace to end the war, they refused. And every time they tried to end the war with me, because of how the game's designed, I can lean on this scale and say, yeah, we want the war to end, but I'm not actually a member of government. And the government sometimes just goes, no, we're winning too much. Let's keep the war going. I've wanted this war to end since like year 4.
Well, you've always desired peace.
True. So now in year 14, the Italian Imperio consists of Italy, Cyprus, Malta, Gibraltar, all of India except for Bangladesh, every single British colony in Africa, Wales, Eastern England, Northeastern England. I'm currently fighting on the ground in Ireland and Scotland. But, they don't want to give up.
So they basically have part of Scotland, part of Ireland, and London.
Yeah, basically.
Well, at this point, it's like an existential crisis. They have to just to endure as a nation.
I mean, they've got like some islands and stuff in the Americas and Latin America, but I literally asked them for peace, and they were like, "No, we had some good ships and we won a battle." It's like, you won a battle because you put like 3 of your newest ships against ships that I haven't refit since 1908, and it is 1920. So, no kidding, you outgunned something that old. Good for you. By the way, would you like some Yorkshire pudding? Because I own Yorkshire!
Wow.
So, yeah, it's annoying. The other games I did pick up also because it went on sale, Infection Free Zone, which I recall I might have mentioned it in the past.
It rings a bell.
But it is from the same people who do like 911 Operator and 211 Operator and some other games that uses Google Maps to create like correct city layouts and stuff. So I am currently also building a fortress using one of my work locations as the home fortress where I'm fighting off the zombies here in town. Your house was useless when we ravaged your house for gear. There was nothing. There was no food. There was no bullets. There was no guns. There was no.
I spent it all on tree trim.
It was all spent on tree trimming, and we couldn't pull pinball machines apart to make bullets with, apparently. So
nope.
So your house gave us nothing. So. But otherwise, so that's just been that's interesting just because you get to use, the actual map layouts of,
that's
neighborhoods to do a zombie game. That's fun. So,
well, cool. Oh, speaking of cool, special shout out, thank you to Albert A, who joined our Patreon at the basic support level. We always appreciate our Patreon members.
Very much. Thank you.
I think I'm going to have to pivot away from the babies firsts. They're getting harder to come up with. I'm thinking maybe I'll just start doing like a monthly pinball meme. We don't promise the babies first as part of Patreon, but give me more flexibility than the duck, because I use the duck in all the babies firsts. But anyway, that's just an aside.
Memes.
There's always room for memes.
The language of society at this point.
Speaking of the language of society, pinball segment. So the language of pinball is... We're going to do a whole bunch of listener emails in the pinball segment. Now, thank you very much, listeners, for sending in these emails, because you have saved the pinball segment, because there is nothing, Tony, going on. Okay. There's stuff like being talked about. None of it is interesting. There are rumors, not to me. There's a reason why we don't do Rumor Corner anymore. There are rumors everywhere about the next JJP games, the next Stern games, the next Everyone games. I think Dutch DPX, so not Dutch Pinball proper, but DPX, PX. They've confirmed their Alice game. So I guess there's that. And I guess Pinball News and Pinball Magazine podcast has an interview with David Fix, which honestly I refuse to listen to, because I've listened to multiple interviews with him, and I don't think I'm going to get anything out of this one, because I didn't really out of any of the other ones.
They're all the same.
Just bluntly. Yeah, it's like Blue Steel, Magnum. They're all the same. It's all the same.
Hi, I'm David Fix. So what do you think the next pinball machine game should be? David Fix.
Well, that might be licensed, and AP doesn't seem to like to do licensing. I don't know. Anyway, so if you want any of that stuff, like, go to your usual news sites, go to your Nap Arcades, go to your Kineticist, go to your Pinball News, Pinball Magazine podcast. If you care about the interview, just FYI, it's there. I don't have a link in the show notes because I ain't talking about it. What we will talk about are all of these emails that we have received. So again, I just stuck all the emails in the pinball segment because you do actually have stuff in the video game segment that we can talk about. But a number of these emails do touch on pinball, but not all. So let me go ahead and start with Wendy H. She wrote in saying, listening to EGP, Tony did not go too far with his reading gadget. Hours of reading is hard on my hands, neck, etc. Anything to make it comfortable so you can enjoy it is perfect. I'm with you, Tony. Yay, Kindle. No more heavy books to hold up. I can't do it. Don't know why she's Southern Belle. But that's where the words, I just have to feel it.
It's where it's the feeling. The feeling, that's just where it came from your gut.
So there you go. You got an endorsement on that Kindle tool. For those that don't know what we're talking about, Tony got a Kindle tool that he talked about on the last episode.
Yep, it's a clicker, so it turns the pages for me.
And I made fun of it. And I asked for people who agreed that it was silly to write in. And I have to disclose, nobody wrote in saying they disagreed with the gadget. We had 2 messages, and they both supported it. Speaking of support,
clicker.
The second message comes from Chris G., who also wrote about your Kindle tool. Isn't it just a PowerPoint clicker so you don't have to swipe? I'm pro clicker.
It is, and it's wonderful. It's functionality that Kindle needs to realize and build into their next generation of Kindle, like with Bluetooth or something, and then just sell the clicker with the Kindle. It's great.
Now, he did continue. He actually sent me some stuff on fencing, about fence law in Kansas, which we had an email conversation about, which I am not going to go into here because no one needs to learn about boundary law in Kansas, and this has to do with more agrarian areas. But anyway, it was something that actually I had spoken to with my boss that I work with. But continuing the rest of his email, y'all should rename the podcast to the Adults in the Room Pinball Podcast, Yard Maintenance, Emotional Maintenance, Futuristic Reading Tech, etc. Y'all touch all the bases.
Eclectic, baby.
Yeah, we could just rename it to Eclectic Baby. So what it is, Eclectic Baby podcast. I heard Rumor Corner was coming back as a quarterly segment. Please address this rumor on this quarter's Rumor Corner. Well, we're not at the quarter, but thank you, Chris, by the way, for writing it. Tony, what have you heard about the rumor of a quarterly Rumor Corner?
I've heard that there is a burning desire for there to be more Rumor Corner.
There have been requests. I've thought about sticking it up on the Patreon if we were to do it. However, here's the thing that I run into, and I don't mean this to come across as overly judgmental to anyone doing anything in pinball, but it seems like everyone has realized that trading on rumors is an easy way to get listens, views, watches, whatever, whatever format you're doing. So it seems like everyone's doing rumors now because they've realized, hey, people just gobble this stuff up. And so the value that Rumor Corner was kind of doing, because I thought this trend was already obvious when we started Rumor Corner, I don't think a lot of people were really picking up on it. Like they didn't understand. There were examples of the CGC topper was delayed because the topper was too big and they had to saw it down on size. You might remember that one, Tony. I don't know if people understand that where some of these rumors were coming from. And since people didn't get it, I didn't want to keep doing it because I felt like maybe we were doing more damage to the hobby than good. I want to be a force for good, not for evil. We were supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them. So anyway, so I don't know yet on Rumor Corner, but I still do have the song because it is catchy. I think that's what people mostly miss is the song. So anyway, moving on. Next message comes from David P., who wrote in. Dennis and Tony. Well, let me do a different voice because that one sounds a little bit like Chris. I'm running out of voices. I just thought, should I do him as Schmeagol? And I saw how long this email is. I should not. I should not do this one as Schmeagol.
You could, how's your Theoden King?
The actor died.
Yeah, I know. Oh, it was sad.
Yeah. All right. David wrote in, Dennis and Tony, thank you for making my dream come true by including a segment on fencing in your podcast.
You're welcome.
Now all of my hobbies are covered on your podcast. Pinball, video games, board games, not really, and fencing. I tremendously appreciate the glorious 7 minutes and 36-second discussion of Dennis's chain link fence. My second favorite fence type, second only to electric fencing, and barely edging out barbed wire. I'm sorry for laughing. You should consider renaming your podcast to Eclectic Gamers and Fencing Podcast. While this may confuse some fencing enthusiasts who are looking for commentary on the sport of fencing, are those flimsy-looking things really swords? Those of us who love nothing more than stretching barbed wire between T-posts with come along will listen in droves. Think of all the new Patreon members. But the real reason I emailed in was to comment on Tony's automatic Kindle page turn. I'm wrong. There was a third one. Oh my gosh. I got lost in all the fencing. As someone who deeply appreciates useless gadgets, this sounds absolutely amazing.
It is.
I picture Tony lying flat on his back, motionless, with his Kindle hovering over his face, suspended by an elaborate Kindle holder. Somehow, he is also managing to wear one of those beer hats that holds 2 cans of beer with a long straw going to his mouth. Finally, the remote control for the Kindle page turner lies under his thumb, requiring only the slightest movement of the flexor pollicis longest muscle to turn the page, allowing all the other muscles in his body to remain motionless. This is truly reading perfected.
You're not necessarily wrong. It's pretty darn close. The only thing I don't have is the hat. Though I do have one of those big thermos or cup things you get when you're in the hospital for a while. That's got the super long bendy straw. I might be able to rig something up with that set next to the pillow where I could just have a little sippy.
As always, I enjoy your podcast and the effort both of you put into it. I bumped my Patreon up to the intermediate tier. Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to David P. for bumping up the Patreon to the intermediate tier. Sorry, I didn't catch it on the notification. I don't know if it gives us a notice when people change the tiers with an alert. I'll have to check. He does have a couple postscripts. So, P.S. The fencing commentary was obviously my dubious attempt at humor. Feel free to read any part of this email on your show if you would like. David, I kind of already decided to do that before I read your postscript. PPS. Regarding a previous email I sent, I got a huge laugh when Dennis made fun of the 3D printed look of my Shark Eat Ball shark that is magnetically attached to my Godzilla pinball machine. Oh, he's the one who sent that in. I got that off Etsy, and it's definitely 3D printed. However, it sounds like Dennis was more interested in the keychain with my mini Godzilla on it. I found that on Amazon. For some stupid reason, I'd like to have appropriately themed keychains on all my pinball machines.
That's not stupid.
It's not. I actually, most of my other than the newer games, but are newer in terms of acquisition, I have little labels, usually of the back glass on clear, like you could print them out and then stick them in. So yeah, I normally have thematically. It makes it easier to grab the right keys because they all look the same otherwise, unless you have a cool keychain that points it out. So anyway, wow, that was quite an email. Okay, so you've got 3 pro clicker.
Clicker's
and
good.
There were 0 anti-clicker. So
clicker good. Click, click,
so
click, click.
I mean, I guess Tony was right and I was wrong. That makes me sad to say that. All right, more emails. Shannon B. wrote in. Hey, but he didn't say hey, he said hi. Hi, guys. Thank you for the most recent episode around the rollout of Wick and recent media tour. I really think you both need to open an investigation to find Charlie Emery. We need answers. Keep up the great work, Shannon. Well, thank you, Shannon. Tony, have you done any more investigatory work on where Charlie is?
No.
I have not either. However, we did have, I think, 1, maybe 2 people comment, I think, on Facebook on our post.
Yeah.
And there's one who mentioned, I've seen a couple of notes about that. One was that, yeah, Charlie, basically kind of what we interpreted, that Charlie's taken a step back, still supposedly working on a lot of the licensing.
Right.
But the rest of the operations are really under a bug in the rest of the family. Saw someone else who indicated their understanding was Charlie was getting a little frustrated with some of the negative criticism that kind of comes the way of a pinball company, and just felt like focusing on licensing would be a better use of his time, and that, hey, he's been at it long enough that it was okay to let another family member, work on this sort of thing. Don't know how true that is or isn't, but there's some theories. So there you go. I mean, I've done no investigation. I'm pretty lazy. Now, our last email is from Scott G. And this one's got a lot of questions in it. So, Tony, I've actually got it broken out into chunks after. I'll read the whole email, and then we'll go ahead and we'll tackle. He's got 4 points sort of for us to address. So we'll go ahead and kind of do it like that so that it makes sense.
Okay.
Folks. I think it'll make sense. I think once people get to the end of this, they'll understand. So here's what Scott wrote. Gentlemen, I consume a lot of podcasts, both pinball and other interests. Dennis and Tony, you're the only ones I support through Patreon. While these comments to follow aren't directed at y'all, I am interested in your perspective. Why do some pinball podcasters refer to themselves as media? I cringe when I hear that. Why do almost all of them have Patreon? It doesn't seem to be that way for other hobbies. Why the insistence on mentioning other podcasters constantly? Does a blog to watch or others talk about Hodinky, etc.? Not too often, if ever. I realize pinball is a smaller pool of participants, but it's odd to talk more about the people babbling into a microphone than the games and people who get them to market. Why call them interviews? They are typically commercials with no relevant insights, just hugs and kisses. Personally, I am not seeking hard-hitting gotcha journalism, but if you aren't able to ask anything interesting or controversial, it's merely pub for that project. Pub, I'm assuming, means publicity. Lastly, the fanboys of Stern. Sounds like they had a nice time, but that doesn't change my opinion that John Wick is a mediocre game. I played the LE yesterday, full of plastic buildings and no shots that excited. It's great that a distributor can earn money selling this, and guys who have locations or write about pinball can cheerlead. However, those who buy these for home use will be rewarded with a strong haircut to their original investment. Thank you for remaining consistent, transparent, and eschewing interviews. You boys do it right. Well, thank you, Scott, for the compliments. There were a lot of pieces to that.
So there were.
Let's do it chunk by chunk, Tony. I think now people understand why I said I wanted to go ahead and tackle it that way. What are your thoughts on why do you think pinball podcasters often will refer to themselves as media?
Because because they don't want to refer to themselves as influencers because it brings up bad connotations.
Now, that's a good point. Definitely, I am in concurrence. The term influencer has a lot of baggage for it. I do know some people that are able to comfortably call themselves an influencer. I don't know if I would ever be able to comfortably say that. So, like, when I do and by the way, some of the stuff, when I know things are abbreviated in emails, I'll try and spell them out. So, like, for those that don't know, because it came up later in the email, a blog to watch and Hodinkee are wristwatch related entities. They're blogs, basically. Well, Hodinky's more of a media empire. At this
I was going to say.
But and a blog to watch is a news blog that covers wristwatches. So just for folks that don't follow that hobby. But I also would, the influencer thing is an issue. I also think people may feel that saying media, it sounds more prestigious than saying podcaster. So there's that.
I can see where they could think that, but I mean, is it really more prestigious? I mean, we've made no bones about it. We're two friends who hang out and have these conversations with ourselves all the time, and just decided to start recording them and putting out a podcast as something extra to do.
Sure.
And I mean, we're literally sitting in a living room talking about stuff.
Yes. Now, all that said, one of the things I will point out, though, too, Scott, is it also is an accurate term.
Yeah.
Media is not journalism. I often, when I hear journalism is a type of media, but not all media is journalism. When I hear the word media, I always think journalism first and foremost. But technically, media is like any of the components of mass media. Advertising is media. Movies are media. These are by the definitions per Wikipedia, which I'm double checking as we speak. And so I had looked it up, but I'd looked up the definition of media once before because I was like, is that really accurate? Are we really media? And the Oxford Dictionary definition of media is the main means of mass communication, broadcasting, publishing, and the internet regarded collectively. So in that regards, podcasts, sure, they fall into that landscape.
Technically correct.
It's technically correct. So it's not, so for that reason, I can't, well, I could, but I won't criticize podcasts for referring to themselves as media because they are, but I do think it's to gussy it up to make it sound a little more.
I mean, I know I've used the phrase.
Respectable.
I know I've used the phrase before in conversations, but it's we're podcasters.
Sure.
It's. I mean, you know, that's the we're of the age where there's the running joke of, oh, you're having a midlife crisis. What are you going to do now? I think I'm going to start a podcast.
Well, I'll tell you what. It may be more work, but it's definitely cheaper than a Ferrari.
It is. Or dating an 18-year-old.
Oh, yes, they're very expensive.
Well, I'm married, so it'd be very, very expensive.
Well, yes. Yes. So let's move on to his second major question, which was why, in your opinion, Tony, do almost all the pinball podcasters have Patreons now?
I think Patreon has very much become one of those everywhere things. And it's not just in pinball podcasting, but in podcasting, YouTubers, Twitch streamers, everywhere. And the simple reason is it is honestly probably the best way to make some funds off of what you're doing because there's no like major other entity pulling large chunks out of it, and there's no advertising. You don't have to do the hackney. Well, you know, here at Eclectic Gamers Podcast, we also like Bravo fence tools, the best way to tighten your fence. We don't have to do that kind of stuff. We're not. In our case, some people make amazingly stupid amounts of money off of Patreons. We make enough money so we can go to TPF and pay to keep everything, all the streaming stuff online and everything. So it's a net zero for us for cost to continue doing the podcast and stuff. But I think it's just a way to get direct support from the fans nobody wants to see my OnlyFans. So Patreon is the best way for them to support me.
Yeah, You touched on a number of the main factors. And I agree. A lot of that, I mean, basically everything you covered really applies regardless of for podcasts in any media category out there. I use the term media in any field, any hobby field, not just pinball specifically. In terms of pinball specifically, obviously, I would say for a lot of people, they'll note that it was Canada's Pinball Podcast really was seen as a one that did a lot of Patreon because it put the whole show is on Patreon at this point. It's behind the paywall, and that might have gotten some more focus on it. Patreon. Obviously, it existed for years before that. Here's where so maybe some people saw the success of that, and that was a motivator. Though I don't know of how many other shows are like behind the paywall, so to speak, for Patreon. I don't know any, but I don't listen to all the podcasts. Here's what I think: it became a very easy way to monetize something in where you had flexibility. The nice thing about Patreon is you have a whole bunch of different ways, a bunch of different perks that you can deliver. We basically promise nothing. And there are other services that do things like this. Like there's one that's like, I don't even remember the name of it. It's like buy me a cup of coffee sort of thing.
Right.
They're designed to let people go and like support with an amount that sort of consistently. Patreon lets you set up tiers, which we did to give flexibility. Over on the Pinball Show, we have 3 tiers as well, where the goodies are different. So like everyone who's a member at the lowest tier gets on the Discord and gets the additional content that we upload. We always upload an additional audio piece every other week for them. Whereas like the middle tier, we're able to say, okay, well, in addition to all of that, we're going to do a monthly online Google call with all of you for at least an hour where we'll talk about whatever industry stuff you want. And then at a higher tier, like they get clothes and stuff. And there are others that'll do things like they'll let the people have like Triple Drain will give early access to people. Some of them will put the Discord at a middle or higher tier. There's flexibility. Here's trying to keep it more focused on pinball. Historically, the way pinball tried to monetize was with merch. It's really tough. I mean, we've had shirts for years. You don't sell very many. I know plenty of people that have tried to support pinball by buying merch. The thing is, the merch lasts a long time. So how many shirts do you need? Like, I still have the very first EGP blue shirt I got years ago. I throw a shirt away the moment it gets even the smallest hole in it. It doesn't have a hole in it. So the shirt lives. It lives on. And so not to mention with merch, you're asking someone to often spring something generally on the order of over $20 to maybe up to $45. That ain't all profit. Most of that goes to the merch store. So your profit share is generally in the range of, it probably varies by the item you sell. What I've seen, what we make on shirts is usually somewhere between $5 and $15, I would say, depending on the quality of the shirt or whatever the site recommends you do, and if there's a sale or not. So it wasn't a good mechanism, but that's what everyone tried to do was sell merch. It's just tough. People get too much. They don't want to constantly buy shirts.
Oh, no, understandable.
And as you noted, what we've all found out in pinball, maybe later than a lot of other hobbies, is there are a lot of people who are really willing, like they want to express their appreciation and they want to do it monetarily on a consistent basis. It's just, that's how they like to support creators. And maybe that's like how we offer. And to my knowledge, we're the only pinball, we might not be, but to my knowledge, we're the only pinball podcast that offers $1 a month tier. We promise you nothing. It's just, hey, if you feel like that's how you want to do it, you can do it that way. Another nice thing about Patreon specifically is the fees they keep are lower than a lot of other options.
Yeah.
So for my wristwatch channel, I don't do Patreon. I have a 99-cent club that people can join, but the amount YouTube keeps out of the 99-cent club is higher than if I were to do the 99 cents through Patreon. I just do it through YouTube because it's convenient, and it allows me to auto embed a lot of the perks that I want to do, like sending messages to those members through YouTube.
Yeah.
Like so. And it's 99 cents. Who honestly cares how much of a percentage they take? It's 99 cents. It's, I have it there really so that people who want to show their appreciation can show their appreciation. And I'm not trying to make a bunch of money off of them, but it feels good for me to have members of that. And because it's a form of, that they think I'm doing enough that they went to this trouble to send me 99 cents.
Yeah, this is the same way I feel on Patreon.
And then they get to, and I support some other pinball podcasts through Patreon. And I don't really like the ones that do early release stuff like Triple Drain. I don't consume it there. I just wait for the regular episode. I just give them the Patreon because I want to support them. So,
I've actually done the same thing with things that do early. Yeah. Oh, you get it a week early. I don't ever consume it.
So there's probably a lot of reasons, but I to me the fundamental one is there's a lot of flexibility on how you can incentivize people, and it's a way that can be a lot more affordable than merch to let people do something, and it offers a subscription model. So people basically they treat you like Netflix, and they're like they have content creators they really really like. They just want to do these things because it makes them feel part of a community, and that's where like the Discords and stuff come in, is to have community and things like that. So, but yeah, it's just really flexible. I think that's what it comes down to.
It is a much more balanced version of like case in point. I've got one mobile game that I've been playing for years, Azure Lane. I've talked about it in the past, and I make a point every year of spending a little bit of real cash because I play the game completely for free, and I've been doing it for years now. So every year it's like, I'll grab $20 worth of their little in-game currency just to spend on stuff, just because I feel like I should support the game, because if nobody's supporting the game, it's not going to stay around.
Yeah. Another thing that reminds me of, though, that's good to point out for pinball podcasting in particular, the market for pinball podcasts is small. Like there aren't very many people that listen to them. So you mentioned the thing like your example of the fence ad, dropping most pinball podcasts don't have the listener base to be able, like Manscaped isn't going to ask for an audio ad, or Squarespace or any of the other things. They're not going to ask for an ad. The listener counts are too low. So there's not a lot of advertising potential. Again, audio podcasts, because now some people will upload theirs on YouTube. They don't tend to get a whole lot of listens through YouTube usually. Some people are doing it with video as well to try and drive that. The traditional audio-only podcast not on YouTube, like there's no AdSense. Like on my YouTube videos, most of my money I make for Watches with Dennis is on ads that YouTube does because it's a video platform and they sell commercials. That's where most of my money comes from on YouTube. It's not a lot of money, but that's where most of the money comes from. We don't make any ad money for EGP. Now, we don't put our audio on YouTube, and even if we did, we don't have enough subscribers to monetize it. We would need to get 1,000 people. Well, they may have changed the rules a little bit, but basically we'd have to monetize our YouTube channel,
right,
and then upload it, and then we'd only get ad money on the people that get the ads played for them. So because YouTube will support RSS podcasting now, but I don't think it plays any ads for people who are getting it through a podcatcher. So there's just like when people use an ad blocker, and the ad doesn't play, you don't get any money. Yeah. So yeah, that's
I've had YouTube premiums for so many years that I don't even
right. And
that I sometimes we were doing a thing at work the other day, and we were using YouTube to watch some safety videos, and there kept being ads, and I'm just sitting here. It's like, it
happens at work.
Will you just log out and let me log into my own account so that we don't have to watch ads? Because I'm just like so having forgotten what it was like to have ads.
Yeah. There's some algorithm, like I don't want to turn this into a YouTube monetary explanation thing, but like I also have a breakdown that shows me how much money I get from YouTube premium people. That there's an allocation I get based off of how much time or whatever that they spend watching me versus everything else. But it's
You're welcome.
It's small. It's pretty small. But thank you. Third question from Scott's email. Why do pinball podcasters mention other podcasters constantly?
This is something that I feel is a distinctly pinball thing, and I think it's because it's such a small niche hobby that the closest I've come to seeing this kind of referencing in other podcasting and like in video shows and elsewhere are either tight friend groups or people who all work for the same larger overall company, where they'll where they'll refer to each other often and such. Otherwise, most stuff, yeah, you don't see that where they refer to others nearly as much. And I think it has to do completely with how small of a niche hobby it is. It's kind of just a tiny little umbrella that we're all directly underneath.
That's probably the biggest reason. I will note, because he had used some watch examples. While I don't hear like wristwatch podcasts really referencing other wristwatch podcasts, I do agree with you, Tony. It does seem to be a pretty distinctly pinball thing. I found the same with video games. They didn't really talk about other video game podcasts. I have heard, like in watches, them talk about other quote unquote media groups in the like Hodinkee losing a whole bunch of money has been pretty big news. So that does get covered. Some of them that have branched out into selling their own watches, I've heard them get criticized for cross-contaminating journalism with selling product. That sort of stuff but it's usually in the context of the industry and what the entity that, like, they're basically trying to have their foot in two different worlds. So I've seen stuff like that, kind of like how we've had amongst video game podcasts. There have been plenty of discussions, especially a few years ago, regarding the issue with embargoing and reviews, and are they what they do to ensure they still get access to the games early and things like that come up a little bit, but not so much like podcasts talking about other podcasts. That is a very pinball thing. A lot of it that I would add on to versus what you said is there ain't a lot of news. I mean, look at this episode. Most episodes, they will not do what we just did. They will make there be news. So they will talk about rumors. So where do these rumors come from? They're coming from other podcasts. So they're going to bring those up. There's also a little bit of I'm going to call it
drama.
Well, yeah, it is drama, but I was trying to think. It's sort of I don't know where it always drives from, but I'm going to describe it as, if you know there's a limited audience pool, like a podcast in pinball can only get so big, really, and you view the other podcasts as competition, then running the other ones through, you might find advantageous to try and shore up your own numbers. Now, I don't personally think most of them tend to do that.
No, but I could see where it's
But the suspicion, because that's one of the things I always thought was interesting. There's also a narrative that happens outside of the podcast about the podcast. So let's take Pinside, for example, my favorite place to talk about. So on Pinside, this isn't everyone, of course. There are a lot of people on Pinside who are very critical of people who do pinball podcasts. They basically think that the podcasters are beneath the people on the forum, even though the forum people are basically content creators that just couldn't figure out a way to properly structure it outside of a forum. That's a little unfair of me, but I mean, when you've got 30,000 posts on Pinside, I don't know what you're trying to do criticizing people who audio record. I really don't, because who's honestly spending more time? But I do think there's often this narrative, and I think where that comes from is because pinball is so small, we don't have like pinball journalism. Like video games have real websites with real articles with people who get paid to write about them, like as staff.
Right.
Wristwatches have that too, but video games have it in spades. But it's a big hobby area, so. In pinball, because there's nothing like that, you have a few standalone blog format sites, Nap Arcade, Kineticist, This Week in Pinball, and then you've got the podcasts. They become, I don't want to say it. I'm going to say it. Pinball famous. They're the pinball famous people, and so. So you talk about the designers because they're pinball famous, some of the software people pinball famous, and then your main news sites and your podcasters are pinball famous. And how do you possibly get listens? You talk about other famous things in the hobby, so they talk about each other because like if you other than maybe the most obscenely vocal people like on Pinside. No one knows who any of those people are. They're all hiding behind handles anyway. But the podcasters are. Almost all of them are operating under their real names. All of them that I can think of do. So It's like people feel they know them, and they're the closest thing to a star you have.
Here's
I hate saying it because it's like, what? It's just, I mean, but
I'm going to make it hurt
I think
more.
I think that's why they do it, because it's like, oh, well, we're going to talk about something. Let's see. Well, people know the Loser Kids, Tony, so we can name drop them. I mean, we talk to them behind the scenes.
Yeah.
See, I know famous pinball people.
They're also like the only other podcast that I spend any time listening to.
Sure. Well, but that's aside. That's beside the point.
But I'm going to make this all hurt more.
Why? Why do you hurt me?
Because here's the real dark, deep, horrible truth. Pinball podcasters and pinball people in general, we like to look at ourselves as being the pinball version of the video game podcasters and video and streamers, the watch people, all those other big hobbies. But the truth of the matter is, we're more akin to the VTubers, a small group that interacts deeply, is in a deeply, I'll even go so far as to say almost inbred way, that is so separate from all of the other outside groups because our group is so small, that it gets to the point where self-reference and running jokes are one of the most common and easiest things to get to the in-group, which helps keep the outer groups away.
Interesting. And that's a good point about the self-referential, because I've seen instances where people will, like on pinball forums, criticize, or I've seen them on review, like on the pinball show. We've had iTunes reviews where there's just too many like referential jokes. I don't get it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's a fair point.
Wrong. But I mean, it's like IGN doesn't have to refer to PC Gamer or Eurogamer or any of those because they're IGN. But there is nobody in pinball who's IGN. All of pinball put together isn't IGN.
No. Interesting. Last question out of the Scott email. We're getting a lot of mileage.
This has been really good,
yeah,
Scott.
well, yeah, it's fleshed this out quite a bit.
I'm going to go. This should be the thank you, Scott.
Thank you
section.
Yes, thank you. So finally, last piece that was in there that I thought was worth a good discussion on. Why call the interviews that podcasts do interviews when the questions are so basic? Is, I guess, how I would summarize it. You got the? I mean, I'll initially, kind of like I did with the word media, they are still technically interviews, even if the questions are super lame. So, I mean, they are. But if you're asking someone, if you bring someone on to ask them questions about something, it is an interview. But why do you think they do it that way, I guess?
Pinball is so small, it's so niche that you can't risk a friendly contact if interviews are your way of doing things. Mm-hmm. You can't risk getting one of the few players, because there are so few players mad enough at you that they won't talk to you again.
Mm-hmm.
You can't play hardball because those few players typically are involved with each other, so that if you get one person against you, you've lost a group, and there's just not enough people to make up for it. And nobody in pinball is so big that they have no choice but to talk to you, even if they don't like you.
I do think that explains a lot of why the interviews are so softball. And I know Scott noted in his message to us that he's not looking for like hard hitting style stuff. It's just he's not finding the questions very interesting. Now, we've had a really odd relationship with interviews on EGP.
We have,
because we go back years, and there was a time where really early on, in particular, we tried to do interviews. Not just in pinball either. We tried to do interviews. We did a few, and then we pivoted, and for a while we did a lot of guest hosting. And I very deliberately structured those as guest hosts because it wasn't about bringing someone on to talk about a particular project and ask them questions about it. It was, we want your perspective. We would let them have a say in the show notes, like in terms of what content they wanted to cover. And that's where we've we've brought on, talk about the whole thing, podcasters mentioning other podcasters. Let me tell you something. When you want to have guest hosts, one of the easiest groups of people to turn to are other podcasters. And I'll tell you why people do that. It ties into the vast one. So I'm going to do a self-referential to the earlier part of the discussion. We do it that way for two reasons. Reason number one, there's always the thought that if you bring in the other podcaster, you might get a portion of their audience to listen to you, even if they don't normally listen to you. So the thought is it might get you more listens. The other reason podcasters turn to other podcasters so often is, they actually have decent equipment to do the audio recording.
That is such a huge point.
Because so many of these interviews that happen are on total garbage potato microphones and stuff. It's shocking. I mean, you can just look at some of the most recent George Gomez interviews that have happened and how horrible his audio is. It's so deeply annoying. It's easier to turn to people that have the stuff. Yeah. And podcasters do. So that's why, I mean, and I've known people where, we've had Jason Knapp on a couple of times to be a guest host and stuff, who, he's gone and explicitly got a decent microphone. So you're like, Jason's a good one to talk about because he knows pinball. He's got an audience. It might not listen to us. And so we've done a lot of guest hosting, and then we sort of dropped doing that regularly as well, mostly because the scheduling got to be really tough.
Right.
I think why they call most of the time, again, I do have to lean back into, I do think they're accurate in describing those interviews, those softball interviews, as interviews, because it is about asking about a project. I mean, they're bringing on George Gomez to ask about the drama of John Wick, or they want to bring on Keith Elwin so he can talk about Jaws. I mean, it is very much in what you would think of as any normal media tour. What I know can get frustrating for people is the same person is doing the same interview over and over again in a niche hobby where a lot of the audience is listening to multiple of these shows.
Right.
And that happened with Gomez just recently. People asked him on, he said yes to all of them, and he's answering the same questions from everyone. So you're feeling like, why is it so redundant? And the reason is because the podcasts are operating separately, even with all their self-referential, they're operating separately. And there have been instances where podcasts have tried not to run into that. It's because of the egos involved in this niche hobby. It's tough. We had a guest host on once. I won't say who it is. People can ask us at a show. And the guest host agreed, and they came on, and the guest host told me after the fact, I think it was after the fact, that they were supposed to actually be on another podcast, and that podcast then canceled them because they came on us. And said they would have to wait a while because they didn't want to. And I think that was sucky because they had already agreed. However, I have been sympathetic to, I knew someone else once another podcaster who I was in communication with, who upset someone involved in one of the, on a game release, because they asked, are you going on any other shows? Because they were trying to set up an interview, and they said yes, and that show was going to come out first. And they said, okay, well, we won't do an interview with you then because you're already going to be having an interview out. Mm-hmm. But then the designer, I don't remember if it was a designer or code person or whoever it was upset that they didn't get to be on both shows. But the other podcaster was trying to be sensitive to the whole idea of, well, how many times do you want to hear the same interview?
Right.
What are we going to ask about that's any different than anything else? And so they tried to take steps to not do that to the audience. And then you end up pissing off the content, the game maker, because they want to be on everything. They don't care that the same audience is listening to all the shows. So there's all of this. So as you noted, you don't want to lose your access to them, so you don't want to be too rough on them. There's also just standard human nature, because again, while we may be quote unquote media, this isn't journalism. You have journalism training, Tony. I don't think most of the people in pinball podcasting do. And it gets really, really tough to be hard on people when you're looking them face to face or talking to them direct. And one of my favorite podcasts to listen to is Slam Tilt Podcast, but I brought it up when it happened, and I'll go ahead and cite it here. I don't mean it to be offensive, but they are pretty tough on brands as a group. But when they brought in American Pinball, it was all sunshine and rainbows in front of them. And I understood why, because when you're talking to the people who make the stuff directly, it's hard to be mean. It's really hard.
Why are you so terrible? Is a tough question to ask.
And even if you would be willing to never have them back, it's really tough to do that, And then you have to ask yourself, because we see this also in corners of the pinball content world of, making your bread and butter, going around being a I mean, is that helpful or positive? I know I don't like to consume content that's just negative solely for the sake of shock.
Yeah.
So, I mean, why they call them interviews is because they're going in and asking about a project. Why are the interviews so bad? Because of everything we just said. You don't want to alienate them. It's hard to be mean to their face. You don't want to be overly mean. You can't think of anything more creative. You're not a trained journalist. It's just all of that.
Yeah.
We're just not really well equipped to give what Scott's wanting here, because it's a bunch of hobbyists that bought microphones and are trying to create content with no training.
Well, and I think even more than that, I mean, I think that's the main core of it, but you'll see the same thing in actual interview things. If you watch, especially if you go online, you can go on YouTube and you can find clips, because like when actors are stumping for their new movie, they literally like sit in a room and then they just rotate out interviewers, like dozens and dozens and dozens of interviewers over the course of a couple of hours. And they're all asking the same questions. But you can find clips where after hours of this, the actors start getting silly and stuff. There is a clip out there that is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life, because Leslie Nielsen, talking about one of his movies, had gotten a hold of a fart machine. and he's in the entire time he's talking, he's just hitting the button on this fart machine. He's like, oh, sorry, lunch is just not really great. So I was, for the entire interview, I could barely breathe through it. I was laughing so hard. But you'll see this. I mean, especially there's clips out there of the people from the Spider-Man, one of the newer Spider-Man movies, where they were getting silly because they've been interviewing the same questions for like 3 hours. Because those, even the actual quote unquote journalist people, they always ask, it's the same questions, and very rarely are they anything hardcore, and it just gets old after a while.
There are instances, and I mean, I don't want to, because it's not really their job, but I mean, if you want to also blame the people that are being interviewed, like they don't hold content creation podcasters accountable for the quality of the questions either. So I've seen instances of those scenarios where you'll see the actors and they'll get asked something and they'll be like, that question is terrible. Like, why did you ask that? It's starting to come up a lot more when they start asking women about like their clothes and stuff that they wore in the movies. But sometimes it'll even just be like the most banal just thing. And some actors are more known for it. Like Tommy Lee Jones purportedly is not a great interview because he has basically zero tolerance for stupid questions. And he will tell you that your question is horrible because you're not asking anything that's interesting. There's no intellectual stimulation to what you're asking him. So people just don't ask him anything. It's my understanding.
So he won.
Right. So, just like where I guess as a case in point, one time when we had on as a guest host, this is before I did This Week in Pinball podcast, or the Pinball Show or any of that. Zach Minnie was on as a guest once years ago. I don't ever remember it, but I remember he did something a lot of people do. It's almost a verbal tick where they'll say, "That's a great question," and I had asked 2 or 3 questions, and he had said it 2 or 3 times, and I responded, "You don't need to tell me it's a great question. I know it is. That's why I asked it." Now, maybe that was mean. I thought it was funny. But the point being, those words, we don't like. I don't want to go in and have to edit that out. We don't need to hear how great my questions are. I know my questions are really good. That's why I had questions. I don't like asking silly questions, but sometimes you do.
I remember early on, I used "I agree completely" a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all have our verbal.
Right.
Verbal ticks are a whole other. There's a whole like running joke with Joel Engelberth saying that's fair, and Travis Murray's got a catchphrase line, and I'm sure I've got one too. So we all have our lines. But okay, well, thank you, Scott, and everyone who emailed in. You saved the entire pinball segment.
Victory!
Yay.
It was actually a really good, fun segment.
When I went through these, I was compiling all the emails last night. I was like, you know what? There's actually a lot of stuff here. I think it's going to get us a good discussion period, and it did.
Yeah. Oh, and the Kindle clicker. The Kindle clicker.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that anymore.
It's great. I highly recommend the Kindle. Let me tell you, this morning I had it set up at my desk because I made myself some homemade corned beef hash for breakfast because nobody else in my family's awake before the crack of noon. And I'm just sitting there, click, eat breakfast. Click, eat breakfast. Worked great.
Okay.
Click.
Well, did your clicker write your video game segment?
How'd you know?
Because I just see click, click in the notes.
Okay, so a lot of stuff happened in video games. 2 big runs of game announcement shows because we're getting to be summer, so it's that time of year. I thought I would open up with video game adjacent, specifically all of the mini TV shows and movies that have been announced or had more information released about them. Amazon really surprised me with this one. Releasing on October 25th is a Like a Dragon Yakuza live-action TV series.
Oh, I didn't know about this one.
I didn't either. It was the first I'd heard of it. I mean, obviously, to be releasing that quickly, it's been in production since before Fallout became this enormous hit. But Yakuza series, not one I would have originally thought of somebody picking up, but I can understand it. But I don't know. It'll be interesting because I typically think of the Yakuza games as kind of like over the top.
They are.
Yeah.
The humor is just goofy. It'll be interesting to see. Do they go with that vibe, or is this like Amazon's response to Shogun?
Yeah, this is going to be super serious. Because the Yakuza games
surely it's not.
Are like, to me, the Yakuza games are somewhere between like Grand Theft Auto and
Saints Row.
Saints Row.
Yeah, no, I definitely could see it after having played a couple of them. Yeah, well, I mean, if Amazon, again, obviously done production-wise before Fallout came out, but I think what Fallout showed to a lot of people, I would hope, is that you need to capture the spirit of the game that you're making the show about. That was what went wrong with Halo.
Yep.
The sounds are all there, but it doesn't feel like Halo. They decided the audience was too stupid to understand the game world, and
right.
So Master Chief doesn't wear a helmet and stuff. It's just like it doesn't work. Whereas in Fallout, it's like no, they're going to be naive. You're going to see their low charisma score.
It's just silly, over the top stuff.
Yes, and just ridiculous. I mean, it's a post-apocalyptic world where people walk around with little mini nukes and stuff. I mean, come on.
And the monsters have fingers for teeth.
Yes, finger teeth.
Finger teeth. Netflix also dropped a new trailer for their animated Tomb Raider show, finally has a release date of October 10th. And they also announced that they're doing an animated Minecraft series, which is going to be interesting because there's also a Minecraft film coming out with like Jack Black involved. So we'll see how that goes. And there's an Among Us animated series on the way as well. No release date on that, but I can see where that could be hilarious. Last of Us, obviously, we knew there was more Last of Us coming out. They've decided that it'll probably be a total of 4 seasons to cover both games. Like season 1 was game 1, but they think they're going to need like 3 seasons to do the second game because it's got so much more story and they are breaking up and it's going to be shorter. Like the season 2 is only going to be 7 episodes.
Okay.
But the episodes are going to be longer. One of them is supposed to be especially long, and they're going to be more blockbuster style feeling is what they're aiming for. But they think it's going to end up being 4 seasons total to get both games completed. And in the one that really kind of was weirdest to me, there are 2 film adaptation of John Romero's autobiography, Doom Guy, Life in First Person being made. One is a straight up documentary, and the other is a dramatized adaptation.
Now, it's tough because obviously we know who John Romero is, but is there really enough nostalgia for him to warrant? I could understand the documentary because anything.
No, the documentary, that makes sense.
Sure. But does anyone really care about him enough that we need a dramatized adaptation?
I don't know. I can't wait to see the dramatized adaptation of the production of Daikatana. Yes. Yay!
I'm just imagining Carmack's going to be the villain in this, and
he'd have to be.
But it's like, but no one who knows is going to believe that,
right? But since when does it have to be believable?
I just
All they have to do is say based on a true story.
Inspired by real events.
Inspired by real events.
Yes, thank you, signs.
The first of our two big game reviews I wanted to talk about was the Summer Game Fest. There was a ton of games in it.
Yes.
I'm only going to talk about the ones that tip the top of my scale. If I miss one that touched on your scale, Dennis, feel free to interject. Lego Horizon Adventures is a Lego version of the Horizon games.
Yes, hide in the tall Lego grass to fight the Lego dinosaur robots.
I highly recommend watching the trailer, though, because it was hilarious. I mean, they definitely embraced the Lego style camp to go with this game series that's like super serious.
Right.
And we're going to have Potter 25 because obviously Harry Potter needs a Quidditch game so they can enter the sports. I hope they start doing them every single year.
Maybe that'll be what the JJP version is.
Oh, that would be
It'd be so good, is what you were going to say.
That'd be so amazing. It's just a Harry Potter Quidditch Championship. That's the JJP game. But sure, why not? We need a sports Harry. I mean, Hogwarts Legacy did well. It sold well.
Yeah, but that's not a sport game.
I know. I wonder if they're thinking that there's like a crossover between the dude bros who love, all the sports games and Call of Duty and those who love Harry Potter.
It just reminds me of that terrible...
Is there a niche little market in there?
That terrible Wii game, the Link archery game that was so awful.
Oh.
That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That
you got to do the motions and everything.
Game was terrible. The game was terrible.
Star Wars Outlaws. They had a trailer that showed some more from that, which of course played the nostalgia because you got to see Londo playing Sabacc in it during the course of the trailer. The biggest thing to me is how has it taken this long to get an open world game, Star Wars game, where you're playing a smuggler? It seems like it would have been the simplest thing. It seems like it would have been one of the first games you would have seen. But
yeah, I don't know. A lot of people probably think people just want to play Jedi. So
I guess. I mean, Civ 7.
Yes.
I mean, it's Civilization. It's going to be good. Has there ever been a bad Civilization game? I don't think so.
Well, maybe one of the non-Sid Meier ones, but not terrible.
Not terrible.
I tried.
I mean,
to
be fair,
I played a lot of them.
There's no way it's going to match Civ 4. I don't know that any other Civilization game can ever be as good as Civ 4.
Without Leonard Nimoy to do the encyclopedia.
Yeah, Leonard Nimoy's encyclopedia was amazing. His Sputnik was so good.
Beep, beep,
beep, beep. Oh, there is.
No,
I hate
sad.
to admit this. I know I'm sad too, but there is a group out there that literally just has a video that is every Leonard Nimoy narration from Civilization, and you can play it, just all of it, just to listen to him do because all of the quotes and it's great. I have definitely gone through it to listen to certain clips, but I always have to listen to the Sputnik clip. We finally got a release date for Space Marine 2, which was a Christmas release that got pushed.
Yes, I am looking forward to this one.
It got pushed to September 9th, so we're not very far away from it. So that is probably going to be I'm not going to pre-order said game, but I will probably get that game before it goes on sale because I really enjoyed the first Space
I may
Marine
wait
game.
on it, but I do plan to play it.
Yeah, I'll get it. Not launch. I like to wait at least a couple weeks to get the major bugs fixed on stuff, but I'll get it pretty early. They've decided to follow up the Batman Arkham games with a new one called Batman Arkham Shadow that is exclusively a MetaQuest 3 VR game.
I didn't know VR was still a thing.
I really didn't either until there was just so much VR announcements this summer. Most of them are PlayStation VR because the new PlayStation VR just came out. But it just cracks me up. Batman Arkham as a VR only game seems like such a terrible choice. Slitherhead, it's a horror game where it appears that you play a parasite that jumps from person to person and possibly into dogs and stuff as well, fighting monsters or other parasites that have embedded themselves into people. And it's got some serious body horror stuff going on from the trailer, with like people looking absolutely normal, and then suddenly they're changing into giant monsters as you rip out of the face of one of your host and jump into another host, jump straight into their eye and take over. And it's
takeover.
It looked
creepy
a little,
takeover
yeah.
stuff.
It was like what was that? Fallen. It reminded
Time
me exactly.
is on my side. Someone watched that on the airplane when I flew out to Virginia a few weeks ago.
Did they?
Yep.
I haven't really thought of that movie in a long time until just now, but
that was spirits. That was like a demon
spirits,
jumping,
yeah.
so there wasn't body horror.
This definitely has some body horror in it. Another thing I found interesting was Inner Sloth, the makers of Among Us, has created a new indie game funding like over company called Outer Sloth that is just there to provide support for indie companies. And they've specifically said they want to provide the kind of support that they looked for and really wish they had when they were creating Among Us. And Among Us, if you don't remember, is the cute little game where it's like somebody's...
You're the imposter. No,
Yeah,
I'm not.
exactly.
Mom, he's calling me the imposter. You're the imposter. Kick him out.
Exactly. But the interesting thing is that game was out for an extended period of time before it suddenly blew up into popularity,
Right.
because streamers started playing it a bunch on YouTube or on Twitch. So there is a Dune open world survival MMO coming.
Yeah, I was sad when I learned it was an MMO.
Yeah, that kind of ruined it for me too. I didn't like their trailer because it's literally just a cinematic trailer that showed nothing about gameplay. And it seems like it's basically just a kind of alternate history what if type world.
I thought the idea of it being an alternate timeline, the Muad'Dib is a woman, sort of thing. I thought that was a clever way to justify it being a different world than what obviously the narrative would be of the story. But the MMO part
it just ruins it.
Yeah, for me,
I'm kind of done with MMOs.
Yeah, I don't want to. The time sinks are just so extreme.
Right. Speaking of alternate universes and what if scenarios, Alan Wake 2's Night Springs DLC is that. It follows 3 different characters through some what if scenarios. I haven't played Alan Wake 2 yet.
I have not either. I also heard that they indicated it will be getting a physical release.
They did. It's supposed to be getting like a big fancy physical release soon.
I do need to play it. I really like the first Alan Wake.
The first one was
a lot.
great. Like I didn't expect it to be nearly as good as it was. I thought it was kind of a silly thing when I first, but it actually...
Well, shine the flashlight to hurt him. I thought I was going to get really pissed with the mechanic. It actually was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it worked really well. Monster Hunter Wilds looks to be coming out in 2025. The Monster Hunter franchise is huge. I've tried to get into it so many times, and I can't. But I know I have so many friends that they are just giant Monster Hunter fans. I've just never been able to get into it. There was also the PlayStation State of Play. They announced a ton of games. I had very few that I'm going to cover here. Dynasty Warriors is finally putting out. They're putting out Dynasty Warrior Origins, which is a return to a Dynasty Warrior style game that we've not seen in a while. It's medieval Chinese.
The original.
Yeah, it's the originals. Because lately they've been doing all the crossovers with, Legend of Zelda and Persona and a bunch of other ones. And to be fair, one of the funnest games I ever played of a Dynasty Warrior was an old crossover they did, which was the Dynasty Warrior Gundam series, which was hilarious and fun. But the Dynasty Warrior games are great just because they don't play around with these super... It is not Elder Scrolls or that type of gameplay, because it's like, here's 1,000 enemies. You have a spear. Next time they're going to send 5,000 enemies because you killed 1,000 in a second. And it is just over-the-top action that is fun in its own right without being the get good noob style that has become so popular lately. They did announce that God of War Ragnarok is coming to PC with its DLC as a single package.
Okay.
Marvel Rivals is coming out, which is Overwatch with Marvel characters.
Yes, I've been keeping an eye on that one.
Yeah, I can see where that one could have. It could be interesting, and let's be honest, it could be enormously popular if the gameplay is halfway decent. And so many PSVR games have been announced, but what I thought was interesting was ahead of the video, they had a investor presentation, and the upcoming CEO of PlayStation, Herman Hulst, talked more about their plans for PC and PlayStation integration. And they said specifically they are going to be releasing live service titles day and date on both systems.
Oh.
But they're being more strategic with single player and narrative titles, because they are hoping this will entice PC owners to buy consoles to play the sequels earlier.
Okay.
It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Does that work on PC people, Tony?
No.
Okay.
It's literally the dumbest. I am not going to buy a PlayStation to play Horizon
3. The
Legoing like a year early. I'm not. And I doubt most people will. Sure, you might get some people who have both systems for other reasons but you already have those people because they've got the systems for other reasons. I don't think nobody's going to want to buy to play a new God of War game. Man, I just really enjoyed that God of War Ragnarok, and the new God of War is coming out, but I have to buy a PlayStation to play it. I don't think they're going to get nearly as many sales there as they think they are. But we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. And my last thing to finish out this little segment is Yoshida, director for Final Fantasy XIV, has decided to tempt the fates as massively as possible. After their major issues with their last expansion, because they were DDoSed in addition to having the expansion launch, the servers pretty much completely collapsed. Wait times were insane. Nobody could log in for an extended period of time. Major issues. It's a very terrible bad look. He went ahead and said that there is almost no chance of server congestion with their new expansion that is getting ready to launch, and that they've fixed those issues.
Yeah.
Good for you.
He's all good to go.
Yeah. Good job tempting the fates. That's just put that out in the universe. So it has been a big, and the thing is how big this is I really didn't touch on anywhere near all the games that were announced.
No, there were a lot.
And I didn't touch on a lot of the drama that has been going on in the last 2 weeks because it hasn't stopped. Sorry to those of you who love Kerbal Space Program 2. It sounds like the entire staff is being laid off and the company's being shut down. But it's just a lot of stuff going on.
As it always has been, as it always will be.
So say we all.
Mm-hmm.
Yay. But that's it.
Well, if people want to reach out to us, there's a facebook.com/Eclectic Gamers Podcast. There's email, which is the preferred way, eclecticgamerspodcast@gmail.com. You can support us on Patreon for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/eclectic_gamers.
We're available on Twitch and Instagram as eclectic_gamers.
And we will be back in 2 weeks with all the new game news that you can handle. But until then, I am Dennis.
I'm Tony.
Bye-bye.
See ya.